Reverend Fathers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear brothers and sisters in Christ, on behalf of the Parish Board, I would like to wish you all a warm welcome and thank you for honouring St Nicholas Parish and Church community with your presence here today. It is wonderful, as always, to see all familiar faces of our friends and all the special members of our parish. I know that you will all join me today in extending our heartfelt and sincere welcome to our visitors from various Orthodox and non-Orthodox communities who may be joining us here for the first time today. Welcome, one and all. I'm delighted to welcome our distinguished presenters today. Dear Fathers, you have travelled from various areas of New South Wales to present at this important seminar, and I thank you for accepting the invitation. I would also like to pay tribute to a man who diligently and passionately advocates for our parish and our Orthodox faith. He works tirelessly to ensure so many of us never lose sight. I acknowledge and thank our parish priest, Father Nemanja Mrđenović, for instilling a spiritual, loving, forgiving culture at our parish and for initiating this idea of hosting an Orthodox family seminar at our parish. We plan to make this an annual event at our parish. I'd like to thank the members of our parish board and the Circle of Serbian Sisters Mother Ljubica for working tirelessly over the past few days in preparation for today's seminar. Thank you for your amazing efforts and never say quit attitude. I was thinking late last night what words best describes an Orthodox Christian in today's world. One word came to my mind, and that word was courage. Courage in seeking the truth, courage in making the tough decisions, courage in escaping from old ideas and patterns and breaking the barriers of accepting ways of doing things, courage in making a mistake, courage in sticking by one another through the good and bad times, courage in wearing your cross and saying the Lord's Prayer in public. Courage is going to church even though you might be ridiculed by family, friends, or even work colleagues. Courage to be different. Instead of going shopping or sleeping in on a Saturday morning, you are here to listen to our amazing guest speakers, and I sincerely applaud you all. As I reflect on my policing career, which has spanned more than 18 years and, God willing, many more years to come, in various fields, I consider it natural to question whether I make a difference. To answer those questions, I think of the children at broken homes who I've cared for and realise and that I saved their life. I think of the cycles of domestic violence abuse that I've broken by removing offenders from homes and realise that I've saved a life. I think of the thousands of intoxicated drivers who have taken off the New South Wales roads and realise that I've saved a life. I do not know who those victims or families are or would have been. In some way, they do not even know they would have been a victim. But the victims certainly are out there. Then I was thinking of how many lives have our guest speakers saved and will continue to save, even save today. Dear Fathers, you are to be much admired, rightfully honoured and thanked by many for your efforts. My words, whether poorly described or eloquently articulated, offered on behalf of all of us present this morning, cannot possibly capture in adequate fashion and our amazement at the loss that you have prevented and the heartache that you have saved. We live in a world that employs the term hero far too loosely. We overuse it for movie stars, politicians, and professional athletes. And while some individuals might have unique singular abilities, and while they might on occasion even engage in heroic efforts, they are not our true heroes. You, my brothers and sisters in Christ, are heroes. You are a hero to your families, to your friends, hero to your children and other children. To be married is heroic. Think of starting a family is heroic. Finding a life partner is also heroic. Being here this morning is heroic. Thousands of Orthodox Christians toil every day in virtual secrecy or perhaps even obscurity are true heroes. Today's Family Orthodox seminar revolves around the importance of family. I could describe a family as a big old ship. She creaks, she rocks, she rolls, and at times she makes you want to throw up. But she gets you there where she's going. But all the time, there is one important ingredient that is keeping the family unit together, and that ingredient is love. God expresses his love by putting us in a family. I love this truth. You and I are part of a large family. God is our Father. Materialistic possessions are short-lived, but family love and affection ever dies down. This is the reason why families are treasured and so much effort goes into preserving it. That's why we at St Nicholas Serbian Orthodox Church thought today's seminar would be a great introduction in gaining a better understanding of the intricate and real issues that would hardly be discussed personally rather than in an open forum. I encourage you to ask questions during question time to our guest speakers, as this is a rare opportunity where you have three fathers who have valuable experience and knowledge. Throughout the day, you will hear our guest speakers talk about topics that are affecting Orthodox Christians throughout the world today. These topics could be sensitive to some, and if it gets a bit too much, please feel free to get up and go for a stroll. There will be plenty of breaks throughout the day. This morning, I have a great honour and privilege in introducing our first guest speaker. Some years back, I heard about the presence of an extraordinary priest monk who lived and founded the Holy Transfiguration Russian Monastery in 1982 at Bombala, an hour's drive from Cooma, who occupied himself with prayer, spiritual guidance, and an experienced iconographer. At that time, I had an intense desire to become acquainted with this priest monk. I visited the monastery with a group of people, and I was introduced to this monk who welcomed me and the group like a father welcomes his children who has not seen for a very long time. I sat with this monk, not saying a word, just listening to his words that were very sweet, penetrating, revealing, and at the same time healing. In the first few minutes, I said to myself, this is a monk who I want me to be my spiritual father. In my case, I needed a genuine teacher, and as St. John at Sinai, the author of later applies, a genuine teacher is he who received the spiritual tablet of knowledge from God inscribed by his finger, that is, by the operation of illumination, and who has no need for other books. But I did not have the courage to ask until I visited the monastery a few more times and became acquainted with this amazing monk. Dear brothers and sisters, please join me in welcoming my spiritual father and spiritual father to many, Archimandrite Father Alexis Rosentool, who will address us on childless marriage. Dear Father, please.
Thank you, Draz, for your usual kind words. So because we have a timetable, I'll jump straight into it. It's a joy and a pleasure to be here. And I pray that God's grace will guide us in a true and an orthodox understanding of our topic. And having said that, I want to tell you that my topic, the childless family, I intend to address or look at through the back door, not through the front door, if I may say that. I don't intend to give you a direct answer or to address the question in the way that we might expect, for a mixture of reasons. Probably the most important reason being that I don't want to lecture to you, because very little information is actually taken in when people are talked at. I would rather than giving you a lot of information, I would rather interact with you. So in staying within the time limit of my talk, I would wish to make maximum use of the question and answer period, where we would look at the practical issues of a childless family, many of which are firstly personal, individual, and secondly, they are being addressed in a very, very different way today than they would have been even 20 or 30 years ago. And so there are some things that we need to put into place to see that we're still orthodox in our thinking before we look at this question. So, in saying that I'm coming through the back door, I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach. Approach that challenges you to think about some things for yourself. And here we go. In addressing the topic of childless marriage, after some reflection, I concluded that it would be an injustice to my listeners If I took the topic at face value and attempted to define the various difficulties challenging a marriage couple faced with this predicament, and offered ideas on the avenues of resolution. If we are to remain within the parameters of an orthodox approach to this question, we must be more attuned to its full context. We must understand the issues involved in a childless family, specifically from the perspective of an orthodox marriage, as this is the prerequisite for the creation for the family for an individual living in the faith. We must first establish the correct definition of this mystery, the mystery of marriage, and only then, within this orthodox sacramental context, address the issues of procreation, the rearing of children. Thus, there are two issues here, not one, and addressing one within the context of the other is the more complete approach, the more desirable approach for us here. So we must give some thought to the Orthodox Christian understanding of marriage itself, one of the Church's fundamental mysteries that will inevitably determine the lives of the majority of the faithful. Most of us will intend to get married. Let us understand that outside of marriage, let us understand that outside of the marital context, we cannot begin to discuss or consider the family. In pre-Christian, Roman pagan times, marriage was understood to be a contract that favoured the male in terms of priority, property, and independence. Fidelity for the male as the head of the household was optional. Marriage isn't a new thing. Union of various sorts, registered and accepted by society in different ways, has always been part of human culture. There have been different approaches. Amongst the Jewish nation, the covenant or promise between God and his chosen peoples facilitated the prophetic and symbolic sign of love among human persons and offered a spiritual dimension to marriage that wasn't present in the Roman understanding of marriage. Nonetheless, within the Old Testament context, it is the continuation of the human race, childbearing, that was of primary importance. This is partly because the Jews, through their prophecies, anticipated the Messiah. Every male child born within the Jewish context had the chance of being the Messiah, and so not to have children was considered to be living in the disfavour of God. Neither of these understandings are done away with in their entirety in the New Testament, but a third and far superior understanding places marriage on a higher level. There is a great mystery, and I refer to Christ and the Church, says Apostle Paul. What Apostle Paul is revealing here is not a simple union of two, but rather the invitation from God for three to be wed into a transfiguring union that consummates their entry through the divine into the kingdom of God, the eternal kingdom of which we, as eternal in our nature, are called to be citizens of. Thus, not only are two wedded into one flesh, as the service says, but through the completeness that is achieved through the union of opposites, male and female, we are better disposed to aspire to the higher spiritual love towards God, who has blessed us with this union of marriage and has established the church through Christ so that our relationship with him can be intimate, complete, and salvific. If we study the Orthodox marital text, we become aware of the repetitive symbolism of three, and while there is no formal moment of consecration or epiclesis, as there is, for example, in the liturgy or in the baptismal rite, there are several times appeals to Christ to be present here as he was in Cana of Galilee, and for him to bless this marriage. This then brings us to the heart of our sacramental understanding of marriage as a mystic and salvific institution, a union with God. This union of the three has a profound theological underpinning that defines the nature of this union and the reasons for it. On what grounds, then, can we say there is a union of not two but three, and what is the nature, the character of this union? The evangelist John, the apostle Paul, Dionysius the Areopagite, Macarius the Great, Maximus the Confessor, Simeon the new theologian, Gregory Palamas, John of Kronstadt, and all the way up to the elder Porphyrius, to name but a few, speak of the nature of God as an absolute and unconditional love. God is love. A love so great that its goodness is beyond comprehension, and it is specifically because of this divine nature that God has extended himself through the act of creation so that he can give and receive love from that created in his image and likeness, man, each one of us. Because this love, by its very nature, actively seeks communion, seeks contact, Saint Maximus defines it as an erotic love, and subsequently expounds that this divine eros, in which we also share, being created in his image and likeness, is the driving energy of the universe. Even the Beatles have understood this. Beautifying salvific grace, which through participation offers us a deification. It follows that the soul and the true reason for our temporary existence here on earth is to aspire to this union and to emulate its rich beauties through a Christocentric life. There are many and diverse ways in which this is achieved. Sacramental marriage is one of them. Let me now expound that principle a little bit with a few quotes. Here is a positive definition. A sacrament is the revelation of divine life to the creature that participates in it. It is the revelation of divine life within and through the creature. In the sacrament, the divided, alienated state of the creature's fallen existence is transcended and it becomes conscious of its inmost essence, which is the Spirit of God within it. It enters into the permanent and uncreated ground of its own being, its true nature, its complete and eternal nature. This means that for a sacrament to be an effective existential reality, there has to be a great deal more than passive acceptance of the sacramental grace on the part of the creature that would embody it. We're not dummies and zombies when it comes to relationship. There has to be an active cooperation on the part of the creature, an inner transformation which demands a change of state. If the sacrament in question is that of marriage, and so involves two creatures, a man and a woman, what is implied is that through their love and union, each has become conscious of the divine in the other, and at the same time both have perceived through the veil of opacity, selfishness and falsehood which has concealed the radiance of their existence from them. What is implied is that each has come to love the other in God and through God, through the mutual recognition in each of the divine image in which they are created. Here is a contemporary and critical negative appraisal. One wonders what people today think about the sacred institution of marriage, this great mystery blessed by our church. They marry, and it's as if two checking accounts or two business interests were being merged. Two people are united without ideals, two zeros, you could say, because people without ideals, without quests, are nothing more than zeros. I married in order to live my life, you hear people say, and not to be shut inside four walls. I married to enjoy my life, they say, and then they hand over their children, if they have children, to some strange woman so they can run off to the theatre, the movies, or to some other worldly gathering. And so their houses become hotels, to which they return in the evening, or rather after midnight, after they've had their fun and need to rest. Such people are empty inside, and so in their homes they feel a real void. They find no gratification there, and thus they rush and slide from here to there in order to find their happiness. They marry without knowledge, without a sense of responsibility, or simply because they wish to get married, or because they think that they must in order to be good members of society. But what is the result? We see it every day. The shipwrecks of marriage are familiar to all of us. A worldly marriage, as it is understood today, can only have one characteristic: the murder of a person's spiritual life. Thus, we must feel that if we fail in our marriage, we have more or less failed in our spiritual life. If we succeed in our marriage, we have also succeeded in our spiritual life. Success or failure, progress or ruin in our spiritual life, for most of us, begins with our marriage. A contemporary Orthodox theologian: it is not by accident that Christ opened his path, what we call the hour of his Easter, and manifested his glory during the wedding at Cana of Galilee. It is at this marriage that the messianic age announced by the prophets begins. Christ descends into the human love of man and wife, makes himself present to them, and this sacrament transforms the water of their natural passion into the wine which symbolizes the mystic intoxication of ever-perfecting love. It can only be perfect through the total gift of self toward which Christ will lead them, when the hour opened at Cana culminates in the hour of the Last Supper, or the mystical supper, where he transforms the wine into blood and the blood into the fire of the resurrection. The couple that assimilates this Eucharist is in turn transformed into a single flesh, and this flesh is that not of themselves, but of Christ himself. Their love is sealed by the flesh and blood of God. Now here is some specific theological underpinning, predominantly from St. Maximus the Confessor, but some others as well. The most perfect work of love and the fulfillment of its activity is to effect an exchange between those it joins together, which in some measure unites their distinctive characteristics and adapts their respective conditions to each other. Love makes of the human person a God and reveals and manifests God as a human being through the single and identical purpose and activity of the will of both in a commingling. The way of truth is love. The Logos of God called himself the way, and those who travel on this way he presents purified from every stain to God the Father. This is the door through which a person enters into the Holy of Holies and is brought to the vision of the unapproachable beauty of the Holy and Royal Trinity. Theologians call the divine sometimes an erotic force, sometimes love, sometimes that which is intensely longed for and loved. Consequently, as an erotic force and as love, the divine itself is subject to movement. And as that which is intensely longed for and loved, it moves towards itself everything that is receptive to this force and love. To express this more clearly, the divine itself is subject to movement since it produces an inward state of intense longing and love in those receptive to them. And it moves others since by nature it attracts the desire of those who are drawn towards it. In other words, it moves others and itself moves, since it thirsts to be thirsted for, longs to be longed for, and loves to be loved. You should understand that God stimulates and allures in order to bring about an erotic union in the spirit. That is to say, he is the go-between in this union, the one who brings the parties together in order that he may be desired and loved by his creatures. God stimulates in that he impels each being in accordance with its own principle to return to him. Even though the word allurement signifies something impure to the profane, here it stands for the mediation which effects the union with God. And finally, the energy which manifests itself as the sexual energy in man and woman has its source in the deepest strata of their life. It is rooted in the ultimate mystery of their being. It is the source and generator of all human creativeness, whichever form this may take. It is the radiating, magnetizing, vibratory current which courses through the whole living fabric of human life. And beyond human life, it is the energy of life itself, divine in its origin and sacred in its nature, and not ceasing to be sacred even where its use through ignorance or malice is perverted or abused. The Latin Christian confession aims to hit two birds with one stone. It understands love as passion, and it legalizes the sins of lust by blessing or regularizing a union, which in turn validates the begetting of offspring. We marry, in the Catholic understanding, simply to have children. This is perhaps why the Catholic Church has such clear guidelines on questions of contraception and abortion, and very little to say about the positive and intimate aspects of relationship. In the Eastern Orthodox Church, we marry to further consecrate a relationship with God. Through this, activating and developing God's image and likeness in us. Through all of the lessons and trials that should be experienced through a bond of sanctifying love, mutually aspired to by husband and wife towards God, we will find the fullness, the freedom of our true being. This is, for most Orthodox Christians, their path to salvation. Once the meaning of life is understood and embraced, the begetting of children then is a desirable procreative expression of the beauty of this awareness or understanding. But we have to be careful not to put the cart before the horse, for we understand that if we have not learnt the true lessons of life, how shall we procreate and not be able to convey to our children that most important thing which we don't yet understand ourselves? We can conclude that if this definition of marriage is correctly understood, all of the issues, successful and unsuccessful, pertaining to childbirth, upbringing, and the family will follow on in the same correct spirit. The journey through marriage will be taken with a faith that accepts the uniqueness and divine intention, God's plan for the married couple, which may not always follow a set pattern. No guarantees, but which will unquestionably shape a salvific life. It will offer them salvation. Let us remember that among the saints who are brought to mind in the text of the marriage service, Abraham and Sarah, Zachary and Elizabeth, Joachim and Anna all struggled with the grief of a barren union, a childless union, for most of their life. Yet the Church asks that the marriage be blessed as they were blessed. This assures us that neither they nor we are outside of God's great providence. If, on the other hand, we depart from a sacramental understanding nurtured by sincere faith, the problems, the issue of a childless union, which is our topic, becomes infinitely more complex and distressing. We will obviously try to solve it in our own egotistical way, on our own terms. This is why the context of our topic, and not just the matter of our topic, is so important. There is a second factor, which we can cover more quickly. The second factor that interferes with staying within a correct context is the problem of secularization of our own life and the life of the Church. Sadly, our understanding of the sacramental significance of marriage has been weakened by its removal from the liturgy. We have two separate mysteries now. The liturgy, which sealed it with a Eucharistic and spiritual energy. In the contemporary practice, we are aware that not only is the marriage ceremony alienated from its sacramental fullness, but the correct performance in church is just one step in an alignment to something that is closer to a gala occasion, a beauty that is often superficial and full of vanities. As you all know, more attention is given to all of the worldly details of glamour, beauty, colour, wealth on the day of the wedding. In the early church, all the sacraments were validated through and with the Eucharist. This was true also of the wedding ceremony, which in its earlier forms had no special rite, but was entered into and socially accepted by the marital couple communing together, exchanging banns and drinking from the common cup, thus consecrating their fidelity before God and the Orthodox community. The rites of the wedding ceremony underwent significant change approximately from the 9th century, when the Emperor Leo the Wise instituted an edict which required all legal marriages to be performed in the church. Thus we have a relationship between church and state, where the boundaries begin to merge or blur. The merging of civil and religious laws created a dilemma for the church, as those intending to marry were not necessarily eligible to take communion. There might have been an epithemia or some other factor that did not permit them to commune at that time. During such an accommodation of the church to the mores of society, the profanation of the Eucharist was avoided by its removal from the marriage rite. This went through various stages. But the separation of the marriage ritual from the Eucharist meant that the emphasis increasingly moved away from the sacramental aspect to the judicial and social dimension. We now see the remnants of a liturgical structure in the wedding ceremony, an imitation of the liturgy, but its vital witness is gone. Consequently, with the dilution of the sacred, the secular becomes more acceptable, and we choose for ourselves false gods, science, mathematics, materialism, careers, contradictory values and lifestyles, and all the demons and deceits of the many passions. So we arrive at the contemporary, nominally religious world. Bereft of the sacred, we think and decide in a way that often leads us ever deeper into the labyrinth of godlessness. Thus, if we take marriage as an example, we all know that the specially Christian understanding of a marital union is today not only secularized, it's gone further. It's being reorganized to a model totally foreign to its very nature. Secularization, then, is a process that introduces a measuring stick that is incongruous to the spiritual mentality of the Church. It's a ruler that we've made that has a set measurement, units, and we think that it's valid because the units are consistent. But the whole nature of the ruler has nothing to do with the mentality, the life, or the measurement that the Church chooses to live by. In considering the contemporary challenges that an Orthodox family faces, irrespective of its makeup, child with many children or none at all, is it perhaps a time when we need to reassess and to recommit to a Christian life that is truly sacramental? Each one of us has got to ask himself, to what degree have we strayed from that path which it is truly orthodox in its spirit, in its charisma? Only then can we successfully resolve the challenges of a non-Christian secular society that we all have to face and live in. In concluding these thoughts, let me offer you a paragraph from the writings of the Athonite elder Archimandrite Amelianos. My dear friends, there was a time when people's eyes filled with tears and their hearts burst into flame whenever they uttered or heard the name of Christ. They fell to their knees. And why do we, oh my God, why do we think so little of you now? Why are we so little moved and drawn by you? Why do we so rarely feel and desire you? Is it because where our treasure is, there will our heart be? Do you want to know how much your life costs? How much it is worth? Its value is equal to your thirst for Christ. As much as your heart belongs to Christ, that is how much it is worth. We've now arrived at our topic, but through the back door. The childless family. A successful understanding of what to do in such a difficulty, I think, relies on an acceptance of God's will that rests between faith and conscience, upheld by love. I've intentionally, in my what I consider an introduction, I've bypassed the practicalities of a childless family, what to do and how to go about it. Because this is the responsibility of a spiritual father, a personal guide. Additionally, each individual is a unique creation of God. Each nuptial union, each marriage, is the union of two unique individuals embarking on their own unique individual journey through life, guided by God. The Church, will nurture them and assist them on their journey, but it cannot tell them what to do. Only Christ can. For it is by his grace, to him, with him, and for him that we journey. If we have understood this correctly, we can now perhaps share from our common experience in Christian fellowship from issues that are pertinent for us today. Thank you. That's time up.
That is fine. Thank you. Morning tea. Thank you, Father Alexis. Morning tea will be served in a couple of minutes, so we'll just have a short break, and then we'll have our next presenter at 11:45. Thank you.
Okay, good morning everybody. Once again, welcome to today's seminar. On behalf of the Church Board, I would like to welcome our next guest speaker. Reverend Father Dr. George Liangas is the parish priest of St. Nectarios Greek Orthodox Church in Burwood. He presents to us today the topic of raising Orthodox children in the 21st century of our country, Australia. Not only as a parish priest, but as a child and adolescent psychologist, but most importantly, as a father of four. Having him with us today will no doubt resonate with us all, especially as parents or educators of children, raising them in our current world and climate who have so many questions about what to do, when to act, and who to turn to when those big moments present themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Reverend Father Dr. George Liangas.
Thank you. Just a small point of clarification, which I don't think is relevant very much for today. I'm a psychiatrist as opposed to a psychologist. Fine distinction. But as I said, I've left most of that behind me back at home. And it's wonderful to be here, and thank you very much to Father Nemanja, who we know each other from studying together at St Andrew's Theological College in the Greek Archdiocese. I'd like to start off just by recommending some reading material. Parenting is hard. I just want to acknowledge that. Parenting is extremely hard. And admittedly, I don't think I'm very qualified, only in the sense that in my house I only do the minority of the parenting, partly because I'm not home very much. I do try and support Presvitera, my wife, Matushka, as much as possible, but she's the one that does the bulk of the parenting. I know that when I try and try my hand at helping out, I usually run out of patience very quickly. But in any case, I'm relying on the wisdom of our church fathers and what they have to say about this. And in talking about raising children in the 21st century, I'm not going to present to you any fascinating synthesis of trying to synthesize what our church says with what, say, modern psychology would say, because I don't think that's the answer to raising children as Orthodox Christians in the world today. And I think the answer to how to raise our children, we just need to go back. We need to go back to what our Orthodox ethos is, to try and see how things were done in the past and try to revive a lot of those things. And when I say, and I'm being sentimental about this, but very important virtues, including piety and obedience, just as an example. If you go to a parenting expert in the secular world and you say, what is the purpose of parenting other than to bring up children? Is to bring up children that are healthy and happy. I think that's a very sort of succinct and easy way to conceptualize good parenting. Hopefully it's more than just about managing bad behaviour. But I think for us, we need to look further than that. We need to say, how can we instill virtues in children? Because if they reach adulthood and we have not been able to instill virtues in children, I think the church would say that we have failed. And that is quite sobering even for myself as a parent, and even I find that thought quite challenging, but I think that's what the church would say. I would like to start off with making some recommendations. I think that every parent should have lots of assistance and support and turn to the church in raising their children. And thankfully, we have lots of amazing resources to help us with that. So I've brought a sample here, things that has helped myself and my presbytera. This is quite a gem. It's called On the Upbringing of Children by Bishop Irenaeus. Bishop Irenaeus was a bishop of Russia at the turn of the beginning of the 20th century, so just over a century ago. There are a collection of about 10 or 11 talks that he presented, and they've been brought together in a book. I would have copied it. It's quite small, but for respecting the copyright of the book, I didn't. I do have a spare copy, which I can leave behind. And most of my talk will be from this book. So I'm plagiarizing unashamedly, or rather using the material of this book quite heavily. This is another delightful little book. It's called Children in the Church Today, an Orthodox Perspective by Sister Magdalene. Now, Sister Magdalene is at the Monastery of St. John the Baptist in Essex. And she is in charge of the Archimandrite, of the place where the guest house, when the guests come to visit the monastery. So you can imagine her, even though she's a sister, a nun, she doesn't have children of her own, but through her wisdom and through her constant contact with the people that come to visit, she has put together some amazing thoughts, which I think are very helpful for any Orthodox parent. This one here is also a must. This is volume 4 of the sayings of Elder Paisios of Mount Athos. Elder Paisios slept in the Lord in 1994. He was an Athonite monk, and he was also the spiritual father of a monastery he established in Siroti, near Thessaloniki, in northern Greece. He was named he's been declared a saint only in the last 2 years, but in our hearts he's been a saint for a lot longer. So the nuns of the monastery of Siroti basically were writing down ferociously all the advice that he would give, and they've collected that in 5 or 6 different volumes. So this is volume 4, and it's called Family Life. So I very thoroughly recommend that. That's a bit hard to find. The best place to find it in Sydney is through Pandanasa Monastery. I'm sure Father Nemanja will be able to steer you all. He can liaise with me about that. And lastly, especially those who want to integrate some of the modern psychology, this is called Parenting Towards the Kingdom, Orthodox Christian Principles of Child Rearing. The author, Philip Mamalakis, or Dr. Mamalakis, he is senior lecturer, perhaps professor of pastoral theology at Holy Cross Greek Orthodox Theological College in the States, in Boston. I've met him, I've spoken, we've presented together with him. He's got 7 children, and he's got a psychology background, and he very beautifully intertwines what the church has to say with modern principles of parenting and child rearing. So I'm going back to Bishop Irenaeus' book, and he starts his first talk by saying, there was a monk who asked his novice, they were in the garden, and they see a little seedling that sort of just sprouted, something that was a tree that is still at the stage of just sort of just a seedling, just sprouted. So he goes to his novice, take that out, pull that out. And the novice just grabs it and pulls it out with very little effort. and next to it was a young tree, the same species as what was just uprooted, but now it was still young. It wasn't a tree, but it was, say this tall. And he says, I want you to uproot this now. And no matter how much he tried, the novice was not able to uproot this tree. And the point that the elder wanted to make with this example is that when passions are young, they can be removed a lot easier than if they have set root and they've grown a little bit. And in the context of our talk today, it is much easier to shape the spiritual direction of our children when they're young compared to if they've grown a little bit, even if they haven't become adults. Now let me just get a quick indicator here. Who here has preschool age children? So 0 to 5 or 0 to 6, yeah? A few of you. Who's got school age, primary school age children? 6 to 12, yep. Who's got teenagers? And who's got adult children? Right. Well, this the words here are pitched more at the younger children because it's at that age that is very, very crucial. Now, of course, we should not lose hope, and even if we see we've got quite serious troubles in our teenagers or whatever, we can still turn to the church for help. But obviously, in terms of the shaping of the child, it's going to look a lot differently than when we are looking at preschoolers. There's a saying, what the child learns, the adult does not abandon. In other words, what we teach in these children at this age is going to stay with them even if their behaviour goes wayward at some point in time. We're going to come back to that. In the Book of Wisdom of Sirach, we hear, do you have children? Instruct them and make them obedient from their youth. So the point here is it's never too early to start your spiritual direction and parenting of your child. Many parents, even preeminently pious ones, have children who unexpectedly display bad characters. They are indifferent to the moral or religious. These are the parents. They are indifferent to the moral and religious training of their children. And you might say, how may that be? The child might come to church, they might have very serious involvement in the church, but of course, that's not a complete picture. God knows this person, but often they do not take seriously the fact that they need to be working on the spiritual shaping of their child. Bishop Irenaeus continues, so blindly are they by excessive and irrational love that they don't want to see anything bad in their children. Only when defects become unbearable for the parents themselves do they begin to think about correcting their sons or daughters. And often at that stage it's very, very late. And of course, both as priest and psychiatrist, I am dealing with the pointy end of children that have quite extreme behavioural problems. Often they'll have other emotional developmental problems, and they're wanting some advice as to how to manage the child. And the saint says that, why now? This has been accumulation of, say, 5 or 10 years of neglect of their spiritual upbringing, and it's only coming now when the problems are too great to manage for themselves, because perhaps for a few years they haven't been thinking about what the child needs at that particular point. And of course, some parents come only when the child is making life difficult, not just for the parents, but the public perception of the parents in the community, which is even worse. So, training, according to Bishop Irenaeus, must begin in infancy, where they very quickly apprehend the idea of God. They very quickly work out the purpose of life, the difference between good and evil. In a young toddler, their conscience will awake, and they will be able to discern between love and hate. And at this stage, we can begin to work within them. That's when they start to have feelings of honour and shame. And these are things that we need to work with. Of course, notions of shame, modern psychology will say you just need to, enhance their self-esteem to diminish their of shame. For us, shame can be an indication of sin, which is very helpful to then shape us to turn towards God. Parents must attentively follow their child's moral development to uproot evil and to plant good. They need to work out, they need to be spiritually struggling, and they need to work out that they are on the path of salvation. Many parents, he continues, for a long time regard a small child as a plaything or a doll. So we've got a toddler, the toddler's very cute, they come to us, they may goo-ga, they may do cute things. We of course feed them, we show them love, we cater to all their physical needs. When I read this bit that, sometimes we sort of treat them as a doll, we sort of get reminded of the little Tamagotchi that used to be in fashion, that beep and the child will sort of have to do this or that. And sometimes we are like that. But for the rest, the parents let it run, play, and in general do whatever it likes, just as long as it doesn't disturb them by crying. For a long time they will not see that their adored angel is in reality an uncontrollable, disobedient, greedy child. But the parents will say, but they are only children. We cannot take their faults so seriously. And the bishop responds, do they have a right to do evil just because they are children? If a house is catching on fire, say the oven has just caught fire, you're not going to sit there, he says, and say, what a beautiful fire. You're going to, as soon as you see it, you're going to call your help and you're going to do your best to extinguish this fire. So you need to start working with children from very young. Knowledge, parents will say, knowledge will come with the years. They don't know anything. They don't know any better. And he says this is a disastrous delusion. Why does he say this? He says this because what we do in our spiritual life has nothing to do with knowledge. They don't need to have a master's degree in theology to understand, say, the Lord's Prayer, for them to pray it. In actual fact, the fact that at the time of prayer, this is what the whole family does, that they have a head, a leader in their family, and they gather together in piety and in reverence. That's what the child will keep within them. It's not enough to have knowledge, even, to say that the child will gain knowledge. It's not about knowledge. Because even if you have knowledge, that's not enough. One must have a desire to do good, and one must be accustomed to do good. And then the parent will answer and say, but we can't demand or expect virtue from a child. And then the answer is, but why can we not? Our model for living as Christians is Jesus Christ. And it actually repeats it in the Gospel of Luke, just after the 40-day blessing, the passage, I think in the 3rd chapter. It actually emphasizes it. And of course, how does the scriptures emphasize something? By repeating it, by mentioning it here and there. And this gets emphasized at least twice, that Jesus Christ, the child, grew in wisdom and stature and in favour before God and man. And Jesus Christ, our model, that he's growing up in wisdom. And we'll come back to Jesus and what we know about him as a child. Many saints from childhood, they cultivated virtues of godliness, obedience and simplicity. Not every saint was holy from their youth. We have many examples of sinful people that have turned to God. But we do have examples of holy people, and many examples that were holy from their youth, and their holiness helped them. At least in the Greek Orthodox Church, like this week, on Wednesday, we had the feast day of the entrance of the Panagia, Virgin Mary, into the temple. That God had prepared for centuries, from the time of Moses in the tabernacle, in the tent that they had as the church. From that time, they had the Holy of Holies as a preparation for Panagia to grow up in. So preparing them from youth is essential. Jesus says, "Let the children come to me." If you remember that example, where the parents want to bring the children to Jesus to be blessed, the disciples are sort of saying, "Go away, he's too busy, he's too tired." And Jesus finds out, and he's indignant with his disciples. And that's when he says this, "Let the children come to me, because of such is the kingdom of heaven." In other words, they have something which is very pleasing to God, which needs to be cultivated. He also says, "Woe to him or her who offends one of these little ones." Now, what does the word offend mean? The Greek word is skandalisi. To be a scandal to one of these, to be a barrier, who makes them stumble. Woe. So the way we are able, or if we neglect our children's spiritual path and spiritual cultivation, we will answer to that before Christ. The Saviour said these things because virtue in children is selfless and pure and desires to find it in every heart. Why would you let your child lose it and then try regain it many years later and not try to cultivate it from that young age? Woe to the parents, says Bishop Irenaeus, who are indifferent and do not cultivate good habits and the inclination towards good in the soul of their children from their infancy. They will have to answer for this to God. He gives an example. A child is crying or makes a fuss. Now there's a distinction here which I might come to. They might cry because they've got an emotional need. That needs attention. But if they cry because if they cry they get what they want, that is clearly wrong. And the parents who are frazzled and burnt out and tired and distracted, they need to be attentive to that, and they need to know when the child needs some emotional support and when that child needs some limits. And that is one of the great challenges of parenting today, that unfortunately parents can be too distracted, too tired. So if they get what they want because they cry, because they nag, and then that will often lead to stubbornness and capriciousness. He continues saying that Domitian, who was one of the greatest persecutors of Christians in the early church, when he was a boy, he was torturing animals. So he says, Bishop Irenaeus says, the future torturer already existed in that. Now we understand that some children do have some problems with empathy, whether it is related to developmental problems or whatnot. That child will be very challenging, but even then, that is a challenge that the parent would need a lot of support for and spend a lot of time to try to manage. The heart of a child can be likened to a garden, and the parents are God's gardeners, who from infancy must cleanse the garden, the child's heart, of the weeds and tares of sins and sinful habits. To do this well, we become co-creators with God, which is one of the purposes of marriage. Now, I wasn't here for the beginning of the talk, and this may come later on, But often when I see the couples that book a wedding in my church, I will bring them in and I will ask them, what is the purpose of marriage? If I go down to Burwood Station and have a survey and say, what is the purpose of marriage? What sort of responses are you going to get? And some will say, marriage is for intimacy, companionship. Others will say, talk about children and family. And I will say that is all correct, but from the church's perspective, the overarching purpose of marriage is the salvation of our souls, to be God-like. Father did touch on this. Who is God? How are we going to be like him? God is creator. We become co-creators with God, that Trinity that he mentioned. And I often give the example, say you've got a 5-year-old child and you get him to help you bake a cake. Why are you getting a 5-year-old to help you bake a cake? Is it to bake a better cake? The answer is no. But by doing it together, they're learning skills, they're learning responsibility, and the relationship that you develop through baking a cake together is so beautiful. So when God is giving us responsibility to bring up his children, he is doing that so we can become co-creators, so we can reach salvation and oneness with God. And here it uses the image of a garden. And God, he says, okay, I'm assigning you the job to be the gardener to these children, to cultivate, to make sure that the garden has everything that it needs, that it is fertilized well, that the saplings have sort of some scaffolding, which is a stick, the stick that you put in there for them to climb, that the soil is good, that if there's stones, you've removed them, if there's thorns and there's grass and whatever, you remove them, you water them, you fertilize. There's a lot of work that a gardener does. Any gardener that does it will say how beautiful it is. And therefore, even though it is a lot of work, it is the beauty of the work that a parent is assigned to do. Bishop Irenaeus now points to the mothers when talking about setting an example in faith. And he says, especially the faith that is taught by the parents and especially the mother, understand therefore what a great blessing it is for children to have devout mothers. Now, of course, it is a blessing to have devout fathers as well, but I suspect he's especially saying mothers, and I think following on from fathers talk about the different assigned roles that a father and a mother will have in the family, that the child will see more of the mother. And therefore, if her piety permeates her life, that is going to leave a very important template for them. This makes it very tricky for working mothers. And some of you are around that, not impossible, but tricky. They need to learn their faith from their mother. Not from their baby, their nurse, not from their babysitter, not from their teacher, not from their preschool teacher, from their mother. Of course, grandparents, and here in Australia at least in my experience, the grandmothers do an amazing job, but it needs to be the teamwork. St. John Chrysostom says, as soon as parents begin to comprehend, the parents should teach them the symbol of faith, how to pray and chant, and the order of the divine services. I don't know about the other fathers here, but when we do the baptisms in our church, the proportion who knows the creed is extremely low. It's disastrous that they don't grow up with knowing the summary of their faith. And he says, it talks about the symbol of faith, the creed, how to pray and chant, and the order of the divine services. There's a lot there. How much do we know all that? Mothers, teach your young children to cross themselves. If they cannot make the sign of the cross by themselves, sign them yourselves with your hands. Take their hands and do it together. It should be a very pleasant thing for a Christian mother to teach the small child to utter the most sweet name of Jesus while his voice is yet weak and his tongue stammering. On Thursday this week, we celebrated for the first time in the church the memory of Saint Iakovos of Evia. Saint Iakovos was perfected in the Lord, passed away in the Lord in 1991. He was a refugee. His family was refugees from Asia Minor. He was an abbot of a monastery on the island of Aegina in central Greece. So he was declared a saint in end of November last year. So this week was the first time we got to celebrate his feast. And in his life story, it's a beautiful life story. While the other kids will all play around and things, because they basically, when they were refugees, they lived in a makeshift refugee tent house. It was essentially a warehouse that several families, quite a lot of families were in. While the other kids were just playing, he would get a broken roof tile, and he would get some of this is now the 1920s, and he would get some of the coal they'd cook with, the leftover coal that was thrown away. He would put the coal on the broken tile and it would say, Ayuya, Ayuya. So his childish way of saying Alleluia. That's the thing that they were talking about. We need to speak to children about their compassionate, this is infants now and toddlers, speak about their compassionate and good Heavenly Father, who loves them so much and gives them every good thing. We should teach them about Adam and Eve, how before they were in the garden in obedience to God and they were happy, but as soon as they disobeyed God, the results were unhappiness, distance from God and the rest of it. We should teach them about the birth of Jesus Christ, about the shepherds, about the wise men, the evil King Herod, even him. And this is just a reminder, I'm sure your priests are reminding you about this, about the reason for the season. And we're now in this Christmas period. You're about to enter the Christmas fast. We've already entered it. And yet we could go through all this preparation for Christmas and yet not hear about the birth of Christ. And this for us is criminal. We should hear about the 12-year-old Jesus. We should teach our children about the 12-year-old Jesus. Teach them about the passion of Jesus and his death on the cross. I teach scripture. And in my scripture class there are 20 kids ranging from kindergarten to year 6. I don't have the luxury of having a helper to help me. So I do the whole class together. And I've had year 1s that have dropped out because they felt scared by the stories of, say, a martyr. And we don't get into gory details about anyone's martyrdom, but even mentioning that this person was martyred was enough to scar this child. Why? Because they haven't heard it from home that this is what happened to Jesus Christ. They need to build the resilience to hear that aspect of our faith as well. And of course, they need to hear about his resurrection and ascension into heaven. They need to hear and know about the Mother of God, Panagia. They need to know about their guardian angels and what pleases them and the guardian angel and keeps them closer, what makes them go further away. They need to be familiar with the icon corner of the house. And all this he emphasizes before the children start school. They need to have reverence for the divine services of the church. Admittedly, I get challenged by hearing this. My 6-year-old doesn't like going to church. He finds it tedious. But in any case, he does. And Presbytera gets enough help to be able to bring the children to church. Bishop Irenaeus continues, yes, parents, if your heart overflows with faith and love for God, you will find 1,002 ways to pass on these feelings to your child. We do the greatest wrong to our children if we deprive them of the treasure of faith and piety. And I think the critical statement is this. If your heart overflows with faith and love for Christ. you will find all these ways. The trouble is that our hearts are often not overflowing. They're just sort of sitting there in a corner, and it is very difficult to use some of that hidden bit in our heart somewhere to inspire our children. Just realised what time it is. I'm going to finish to the last part of the talk. And this is the chapter on obedience. Teaching your child obedience. And the example of obedience is Jesus Christ himself. He is the author of our life. He is the centre of our life as Orthodox Christians. He is it. What does he have to teach us about obedience? In the story of the 12-year-old Jesus in the temple, he is there, you can just imagine, without being anyone's fault, without being his fault, without being his parents' fault, he was left behind. He was just caught up in all the activities of the temple. His parents had assumed he was there. He probably didn't hear when his mother said, "Let's go." He was just left behind. It wasn't anyone's fault. And yet, they realise, they spend the whole day journey, they look around, they try and find him, they find him in the temple. And then he says, "Well, this is my father's house." But then what happens? What happens next? The next verse, "And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject unto them." I'll read it again. "And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject unto them." God himself, being there for the greatest mission in the world. Can you imagine as a 12-year-old child wanting to get on with it? No. He is subject to them. Admittedly very holy beings, his mother Mary, Panagia, and his father, stepfather if you like, Joseph, his guardian. And yet, even as an adult, we cannot forget that Jesus in his passion is showing total obedience to God the Father on the cross. So the model of Christ is a model of obedience. We need to be obedient to God. We need to be obedient to figures of authority. We've got the obedience of Panagia, that if it wasn't for her obedience at the time of the Annunciation, the saints say that Jesus would not have become incarnate. The obedience of monks, because they recognize the importance of obedience. He who has succeeded in teaching his children obedience has solved the problems of their upbringing. And obedience cannot grow in every home, but only where the soil is suitable. And we'll talk about what that means. In other words, the parents need to live a proper Orthodox Christian life, to live their faith as faith and not as a fairy tale. The child has every reason to say this: if my father, remember the previous chapter, Bishop Irenaeus focused on the mother, here he's focusing a bit more on the father, because as the head of the family, his prime role is to bring his family to Christ. If my father doesn't honour God, doesn't obey God, then I don't have to honour my father. And he's perfectly right. The commandment to honour your father and your mother just becomes a fairy tale. And how can the child take that seriously? One thing the parents need to do is to act together, to work in concert and not undermine each other. How can a child respect a father, here he says, who is constantly drunk, a mother who insults and curses, parents who constantly quarrel? Parents, he continues, should never belittle each other, especially in front of their children. Should never blame each other. There should never be any expressions in the house, even as jest. Things such as, "You're always lying just like your father. You're going to grow up to be as useless as your father. You're just as wasteful as your mother." No. When children hear words such as these, it is idle to ask for their respect and obedience. We need to be wise with heartfelt love. Don't be indifferent to your child's sorrows. Never say the children are a burden or a torment to you. Always give them what they need. And here we need to separate and differentiate between needs and wants. But always give them what they need. Accustom them to obey you because that is the will of God. Give them occasional treats, but don't give them everything they want. Accustom them to self-control, moderation, and temperance. Be consistent, be firm, be fair. Never forget to invoke the blessing of God on your work with God's help, and with God's help, your children will learn obedience.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you kindly join me in thanking Father for...
All right, let's continue with the third session. Our third speaker today is Father Veselin Svorcan. As most of you already know him, Father Veselin is a parish priest at Holy Archangel Mihailo in Homebush. Father Veselin is a priest with a diverse academic background. He holds a Bachelor of Health Sciences, specializing in behavioral sciences. He also completed a diploma in counseling and master degree at St. Andrew's Orthodox Theological College. Before he became a priest, Father Veselin worked in the field of the mental health rehabilitation. Father Veselin's today's topic is choosing a spouse in God's will. And please welcome Father Veselin.
Thank you, Mihailo, for that nice, warm welcome. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, we should always begin with a prayer. Well, now that we all had nice lunch, those that are already married, you can fall asleep. Just kidding. They told me, actually, my parishioners told me, don't tell any jokes because you are not good at those. Sometimes I can't help myself. Okay, I'd like to thank Father Nemanja for giving me the opportunity to present this topic today. So as you know, we'll be talking about finding a spouse in accordance with the will of God. Just before we start, it's obviously not, when you talk about finding anything in regards to the will of God, we can't be given a formula. So it's not, you don't expect to be given a particular formula that you can apply. You will see throughout the lecture, we will cover different topics in order to arrive at learning about, and having a proper understanding of what the will of God is and how can we know the will of God about anything, and in regards especially now, what is relevant to this topic in regards to finding a spouse. So we will cover, that will be like one of the first sort of subtopics, will be knowing a journey to discover the will of God. Then we look at the marriage as a spiritual journey, and then what we should expect, because if we're talking about finding a spouse, finding somebody that we will live with, well, we know that we're entering into another phase of our lives, which is a totally different phase than what we have experienced before. Something we cannot know what it's about because you have no ways of experiencing what the marriage is like until you get married. You can foresee, you can be prepared, you can see how your parents are, but the actual experience has to be obviously lived. So we'll go through these things chronologically in order to then find out what is the most safest way of knowing or finding the will of God in regards to finding a right spouse for us. So the will of God, or the will of our Lord, what does it mean and how do we understand that? Is it making a right choice and a decision about something? Is it like, do I take a train or do I take a bus to work? Or should I apply for this job or that job? Or is this right study for me? Or is this field of study for me? All these are relevant questions. Probably except the bus and a car. That's not really something that we should think. But anyhow, sometimes from lives of the saints, we know that even those decisions are important. The will of God is understood not only in making a single right decision, so there's no formula, but rather living a way of life which allows God to be part of it. It's a very important point, allowing God to be part of our lives. Because most people think, God, because He's ever present, He is our Father, He's automatically part of our lives. Well, in some sense it is, but it's not, because God respects human beings, has a full, total respect for human freedom. We have to allow Him, like we allow a friend to be our friend, like we allow to enter into a relationship with somebody that we will spend the rest of our lives with. That's a mutual consent, mutual love between two persons, two people, and God is a person. Some people are afraid of making wrong decisions. However, they just want to be given a right answer rather than learning about making right choices through living a certain way of life. This is the reason we need to allow God to be part of our lives, because in everything we undertake, because it's through certain mistakes, through certain falls, we learn a lot. We don't want to fall into this error of always knowing what is the right answer. We want to grow slowly with God in maturing. So through this maturity, through our lives, when God becomes a major part of our lives, we are slowly seeing what the will of God through experiences is. There's a big difference between who do I marry? Is this the right person? Or what is the right course for me? But even if you are given that right answer, however, you're not mature enough, you haven't changed what needs to be changed in you, it doesn't mean it will work. So as we said, that God respects human freedom and He allows people to move away from Him. So, should they choose to do so? And this isn't abandonment on the part of God. This is what we call a human freedom. This is abandonment on our part. So in this instance, God, like a parent who has to let go of their children if they want to move out, He can only watch from the outside. He influences people, but not so directly. And therefore it becomes very difficult to discern His will when we need that. Because we want to discern His will because we don't want to make a wrong choice. We don't want to suffer. We don't want to, we want to do the right thing, but sometimes we don't live rightly. And there's no such a thing in making a right decisions if we don't have our lives in a correct order, which means if we don't have God as part of our life in every decision we make, everything we undertake. For that to happen, plainly, obviously man needs to go to church, as you know, partake of all the sacraments and everything else. But the most important thing, in order to have God in our lives, is a frequent prayer. It's something very simple, but something that people, for some reason, don't see it as important, don't learn it, don't understand it fully. It's just a prayer. It's like a chore. We don't, I'm a good guy. I'll do the right things. I go to school. I do my work. I do hard work. But, I do the prayers in the morning. But we don't understand what is filling our mind throughout the whole day. Everything else but God. And how would be hard. How hard it is then to discern the will of God when it comes to making such a choice as finding, is this the right person for me? You know, if you haven't engaged in a frequent prayer. Frequent prayer is the way we speak to God because He's a spirit. Parents communicate with their children, we communicate with one another, we use the 4 words. We speak. If you don't speak to your friend, well, he's not going to be a close friend of yours for so long. You know, if there's no communication, if there's no words, if there's no expression of love, if there's no expression of interest in that person, a caring relationship, it will slowly move away. And it's the same thing with God. If there is no frequent prayer, there is no way that a person can discern a will of God in anything, because he's not living a life in accordance with the commandments of God. It's not really living a spiritual life. So in essence, an orthodox way of life is a communion with Him, which enables us to live under umbrella of His protection. It's very important to understand, because like the children that live in parents' home with their parents, parents watch the children. They're under that umbrella. They can help them. They can see, you know, what is going wrong, what is right, when they're sick, when they're this, when they're struggling with something. The moment they move away, parents can't see that. Doesn't mean the love stops. Doesn't mean there is an abandonment. However, the ability to guide and influence is almost severed. Not completely, because people keep in touch, but it's not as intense. So it's the same thing. In order to be under the umbrella of God's protection, we have to engage in this communication with Him. And this doesn't mean that we will make every decision from then on right. That we will get straight away, every correct answer will be revealed to us immediately. It doesn't mean that. That's totally another level of understanding what it takes for a person to discern the will of God. But however, it allows us to mature in faith and to be, what's more important, this being under His protection. God puts us in His school. So it's like put us in all the grades which we have to go through, from the grade 1 until we finish, until we get a diploma. And diploma is maturity. This is well explained in the book A Letter of Divine Ascent by St. John Climacus. The whole book talks about avoiding vices and practicing virtue, so that in the end salvation can be obtained. It's got 30 chapters. It's an amazing book of an amazing spiritual person. And this particular book, some of the spiritual writers and saints, such as Sergei of Radonezh, St. Peter of Damascus, Theophan the Recluse, were exceedingly influenced by this teaching, by this particular book of this abbot. And Saint John Climacus, because it is like being put in a school of maturity. You've got 30 levels. Every step teaches you something. And towards the end, you're becoming a more mature person. You're developing a different understanding. This does not mean, as I said, that every decision you make will be always right. You will have many falls. You may make the wrong decisions. However, you're always in that school, and then you're having a chance again to correct yourself through experiences. And most importantly, you're under the umbrella of God's protection. You haven't moved out of His home. Not that you can possibly move out permanently, but you can be away, which we will see in other examples in this lecture. What happens to people when they move out under that umbrella of His protection? By the way, when I mentioned these saints, I highly recommend, I'll take this opportunity, for people to read St. Theophan the Recluse, if you haven't. He's got phenomenal ways of passing this knowledge on to people, guiding them through his books. And another opportunity for people who are interested, because we mentioned frequent prayer, I would recommend The Way of the Pilgrim. I know people who are or we call it elders in the church. They have a lot of spiritual children, and they're of a certain age, could be 80, and they consider this book one of the best books written after the Holy Bible. So, to continue, our Lord, through various ways, so we still talk about the will of God, is teaching us not just to receive a specific message for a specific problem, but is leading us towards perfection, sanctification, and most importantly, spiritual maturity. He will be guiding us, but also allowing us to learn through our mistakes and falls. So it's okay if we fall. It's not okay, we can't say it's good to sin, but it's not healthy not to expect to sin. We will sin, but it's also we have to repent. So in this school, it's like failing an exam. You still go to school the next day. You have an opportunity to pass that exam again, to study again. Once you move out of school, once you leave the school, when what you failed, you failed. What you passed, you passed. That's when this intensive learning stops. So there's a big difference between knowing the right answer for a particular problem and learning and seeing this in way of spiritual maturity. So we see the glimpse of the journey here when we talk about finding a will of God, about anything, and in particular about finding a right person. Knowing the will of God means first growing in spiritual maturity, being mature enough in faith so that it will be easier to read the signs. It will be easier to see who's right and who is not right for us. In this way, we won't be easily deceived in thinking that, for example, meeting somebody at a party, birthday party, I won't mention too much of nightclubs because people may think it's okay to go. Is it not? I don't know. That's another topic. But let's say at a party, people meet somebody and there is a physical attraction. This doesn't mean it's love. We have to understand what the physical attraction is, what love is. We'll talk about that topic as well. And they assume that this is, the will of God. I was meant to meet this person straight away. How do you know that? Like, what, based on what? There's no, even if you met him at church, if it's a physical attraction, it's a physical attraction. We can't say that it's a destiny. But if you're spiritually mature, you will wait and see whether your temperament fits with the temperament of the person, whether that person understands what marriage is, whether that person understands what the journey involves in marriage. You will wait. You won't let your heart be troubled, or you won't let these emotions override your reason. You will understand these emotions. You will have breaks on these emotions. So you can rationally see, and you can slowly see whether this is the will of God, because if it is, it will come naturally. If it's not, it will be very up and down, exciting, not exciting, a lot of heartaches and so on. So this is when we see how to know the will of God. How to know is the only way to grow spiritually when there's a certain spiritual maturity that has developed in a person. Then a person is given by God a wisdom, not just the right answer. Wisdom to see. Are tools to be able to be used for people to pass on to their children or to their friends or to someone else. So, relationships and young people is also another subtopic which is very relevant to here because we mentioned the physical attraction and everything else. And this is one of the most common problems that young people experience. We know this. There's a lot of people that we work with as priests, and we can see that if we read Holy Fathers, we can see that a lot of young people went to see spiritual elders like Elder Pisius, Porphyrius, and these things have been written in the books. So we can have a first-hand experience as priests. We can have also experience by knowing from these holy elders. So one of the most common problems that the young people experience in this day and age, which is not the best day and age, is that they enter into a relationship without any concern, like a very carefree relationship. It's something normal, you know? It's a physical attraction, and we call it a love, and they fall in love. See, even that word falling, it's not very positive. It's like you out of yourself falling. It's a different thing. Love is actually something that should be rising, you know, something that you give, selfless. Falling is like when you fall, when you're out of yourself, when you lose control. That's not love. So very soon they progress, these certain people, obviously not everybody, you know, depends how they grow up, which families, how much influence of the church, how much influence of the spiritual life was there. But let's talk about in general terms, because we know the statistics that every second marriage breaks, people live with each other before they get married and so on. So they enter into a relationship, and soon enough they progress to an intimate relationship. In society, the way we live, this is nothing wrong. Everybody accepts it, and we can talk about so many things that are wrong in the society, but that's not the point of the lecture. But what happens in a spiritual sense when people enter into this intimate relationships prematurely? What happens is that people experience something that they taste this forbidden fruit that is meant to be for when you get married. This is so because when you mature, God can, in a marriage which is blessed, okay, God gives grace and reveals people, gives people this opportunity to create another being, to express their love, the intimacy is not out of lust, it's out of love for one another. So it comes from a totally different place. It's not just comes from attraction. You know, when the crowns are given, that's the crowns of chastity. When people experience this prematurely, they not unknowingly enter into a spiritual realm. Very soon, they will be seeing each other differently. What they perceived one and another to be when they were just dating safely now becomes different. Soon enough, they discover different traits. Oh, but he is like this, and I thought he wasn't like this when I met him. Now he's different, and he's saying she's not like this, and so on and so forth. What protects people in marriage, meaning to deal with these adjustments of one another? Because everybody has to adjust when they get together. As a couple, as a married couple. I've got my personality traits. I've got my sins that I carry. I've got my issues that I have to deal with, what we call our demons. And another person has hers. So everybody brings that together. And imagine that in a casual relationship. These young people but there is no grace of God to help them. In a marriage, there's grace of God. In a marriage, there's marriage vows. So that keeps them, and their different understanding. It's good for them because the marriage goes towards the salvation, as we will explain that later in the lecture. But experiencing this prematurely, people don't know how to handle this. People see somebody else and they can't understand how to. They want to change the person. So then it becomes a tug of wars. Who is going to be a dominant? Who is going to change? And often, sometimes they go to seek, counseling if it's a serious relationship. They go to even sometimes the church, spiritual people. Others break up, and these unfortunate souls, in order to satisfy this hurt, they enter into another relationship. So you can imagine what happens when this continuation of broken relationship, what it does to this person's soul. The soul gets damaged because it's not sanctified. There's no grace. There's no purpose in this relationship. We're talking purely from a spiritual perspective. Purpose of marriage is going to heaven in a spiritual sense. Two people get together, they come together, and they help each other, as we will see later. So in this equation of the carefree relationship, as I said, there is no grace, there's no vows, it is absolutely dangerous. And people need to be aware of this, because the problems will continue unless they repent. If they want the help from God, they have to repent and change. This doesn't mean that everybody who has done these things before the marriage, that the marriage is a failure and everything will go wrong. No. God sometimes sees ignorance and forgiveness later, but people will pay the price somewhere along the line. Either in the marriage, if they come from some family that anybody that prays in the family, God saves these people even if they've done this. And then they get married, but along the line, problems will have to be fixed, because their initial get-together was based on physical attraction. Love is something that grows later. So therefore, we know why God has put this and asked for people not to enter into these intimate relationships unless the day of the marriage, when the priest puts crown on their heads. So they can learn about each other. They can exercise control. They can be given the grace. They can be rewarded with the grace of God that will help them later, and have also spiritual children, and so on and so forth. So that's very important, and this is one of the key factors when it comes to choosing a right spouse according to the will of God. When we mature spiritually, we see this person having so much that has to be helped with, and I have these certain problems. How can putting these two people together who have so much baggage, let's say, how can that work? It can't. It's difficult. And they will really, really struggle. And that's why we have so many broken hearts. We have kids that, enter prematurely, these things happen and so on. So we have to be careful. But as I said, God's plans always, He has always a plan for a person. It didn't mean for Adam and Eve to sin, but they sinned. So He had another plan. He sacrificed Himself. So as long as there's a willing for people, but people have to pay the price. There has to be some sort of suffering in order to come to the right platform where you can begin properly. Okay. So, when these young people, as I said, come for a solution, they don't understand what the solution to their problem is. They often see the symptom. The symptom is, let's say, and we're still talking about people who have entered into a certain relationship prematurely. I'm saying this just so we can all have that in the back of our minds, and we can help somebody who's struggling with that, or we can understand this at a different level. The problem cannot be fixed unless the cause is recognized. It's not the symptom. It's not that, because people realize the differences in one another. They realize that she has got this temperament, that she can't stand this kind of stuff, or laziness, or whatever the character of the person is. That cannot be just fixed by some sort of a therapy or something like that. It has to be back to the beginning. There has to be a certain separation, if it's not, or deciding to get married, stay away from each other for at least a while, get married, begin properly. That's one of the things that can work for people that are experiencing problems of that sort. Okay, so the next thing that we're progressing towards is marriage. How long am I meant to talk for? 45 minutes? 15 minutes. Wow. Got a lot to cover, so I better hurry up. So in marriage, it seems that two people come together. However, it's not two but three. The man marries a woman marries a man, but them two marry Christ. So three take part in this mystery and three remain together in life. So we could then arrive from this statement about the purpose of marriage. The purpose of marriage is salvation. We know that there's monasticism, there's people that live like monks even they're not married, and there is marriage. Both of these things carry pain and love. But it's from a spiritual point of view, we're going towards heaven, salvation. So helping one another into everlasting joy in heaven with the Lord and his saints. So in the marriage, there's also three parts that join in. One part is the first part, which is the part of pain. This is because what we spoke about earlier, touched upon, a man and a wife are called to labour together. See, when we're developing an understanding of a marriage, people that are not married yet, they have to understand what they're entering into, even though they can't experience it. They will be called to labour together under a shared burden. So the burden of bringing and raising kids in a proper way, burden of having their spiritual life properly, carrying each other's sins, helping each other, it's all coming as one. So it's a journey. It's not something that it just happens. It's a journey. It's not a cultural thing. It's not something that is imposed or something that is a social norm and we have to do it, or something because I need somebody. I need somebody because I'm suffering from loneliness, or I need somebody to help me, but that's very selfish. I need somebody, you can only say I need somebody to help me with to answer to, so to be obedient to. If two people come like that, then they're certainly becoming proper humans that, Christ-like people. So, journeying together of shared portion of pain, because there's a lot we have to change, or we have to adopt to. And there's, of course, a lot of joy. Man and wife will drink from the same cup of sadness and failure and of joy. And during the marriage ceremony, priest obviously gives the newlyweds the drink from the same cup, which is called the common cup, or which is called the cup of union. Secondly, marriage is a journey of joy. It's a creation of a new human being. A new person, for as Gospel says, two will be as one flesh. So God unites two people and makes them one. So from this union of two who agreed to synchronize their footsteps and harmonize the beating of their hearts, a new human being can emerge. Through such a profound and spontaneous love, one becomes a presence of living reality in the heart of the other. So I am married means I cannot live without that person. My husband and wife is a being, is a flesh. Husband will give an account to God for the soul of the wife, and the wife will give an account to God for the soul of the husband. That's what it needs to be when we're talking about spiritual life. And that's why we need to be mature in order to know that, what we're entering into. And that's why we can't experience prematurely too much of that stuff, and we have to cleanse in order for the grace to come, in order to truly experience love. We don't want to miss out on love. We don't want to be misled and live our whole life thinking this is love, but it's not. As soon as somebody isn't good looking anymore, the eyes of that person go to someone else. How can somebody fall out of love? How can a marriage break? It's impossible if there is love. It's absolutely impossible. God is love. He cannot stop loving people. Man can stop loving people because it has not loved them properly. It was the love with certain small prints. Subjective. So this is the most fundamental thing, is experiencing that love. And we have to. I live for one another for the reason I tolerate this person's faults. A person who can't put up with another can't marry. You have to tolerate the faults of one another because it helps you grow spiritually even further maturely. You have to understand this equation in a marriage. My wife could be nagging, but that's not a bad thing. I'm developing my patience. I could be telling her something, and we will fail, we will argue. But if we're in the church, there's always, every day is a new day. Every Sunday is an opportunity to renew, to start fresh. But if you're not in the church, you just continue like that. You continue arguing, and then you start going to counseling, and then it's trying to figure out who is at fault. Both are at fault. Of course, unless there's grievous things that are there. Okay, sorry about that. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just skipping a little bit. I want to read you something from St. Paisius, quickly, because this will give us an understanding when we're talking about choosing a person, because we always think that a person has to have all the things that I have. You know, common things with one another. So this is from St. Paisius. It says, "One day a man came to my cell and told me that he was very worried because he was not of the same mind with his wife. I saw," St. Paisius says, "however, that there was nothing serious between them. He just had a few rough edges, his wife had a few others, and they couldn't deal with one another. They needed a little sanding." St. Paisius was also a carpenter by trade. He loved carpentry, so he's using these parables in this way. "Take 2 planks of wood before sanding them. One has a knot here and another has a knot there. If you try to join the planks, there is an empty space between them. If, however, you sand one a little here and the other one a little there, using the same tool, they join perfectly. Some men tell me, I don't see eye to eye with my wife. We have opposite personalities. She has one temperament, I have another. How can God do such strange things? Couldn't he have arranged a few things so the couples match and they were able to live more spiritually? Well, I tell him, don't you understand that the harmony of God is hidden with a diversity of personalities? So different temperaments actually create harmony, St. Paisius says. If you had the same personalities, think that you would be happy, but if you had, for example, if you were angry, you will kill each other. If you will destroy the house with it as well. If you were stingy, you will do well, but you will probably end up in hell, he says. So both of you were open-handed, you would even be able to keep your house, you would disperse everything, and your children would be turned out to the streets. So if a spoiled brat marries a spoiled brat, between themselves they get along fine. But one day, somebody is going to kill them. For this reason, God arranges is that a good person marries a spoiled brat. So that the later may be helped. It may be that he or she has a good disposition, but was never instructed correctly when young. This is very interesting because people often think, I need somebody who thinks like me. Well, how far can you go? And this does not mean, he's not talking about morals and faith and, the foundation that needs to happen. Foundation has to be there. Have to be, same faith. Well, you tortured me for 45 minutes, so. Not even a water, I don't know what kind of seminar is this. So I must have sinned somewhere, that's okay. I'm happy to pay for it. So he continues, he says, little differences in the character or personalities or spouses actually help couples to create a harmonious family, one that completes the other. And he uses this analogy, which is very good. In a car, it is necessary to use the gas pedal to go forward, but also the brake pedal to stop. Imagine if you had just the gas pedal. You can just imagine. Or if you just didn't have the gas pedal, just to stop. You can't go anywhere. Or the other one, you just go into the first ditch. So, or people that are both sensitive and so on. So he goes and teaches people that this is needed for the salvation. This is the work. These are the burdens amongst other burdens. But if there is a right foundation, then everything else, this is good. This is our opportunity. You know, if a person has a wife who cannot say anything to him, well, that's going to be a very, there's a dictatorship, whatever it's called, in the family. It's like a dictator. But there has to be, if there is love, everybody should be able to speak. Say, look, that's not right. Or look, that's not right. So you have your turn and she has her turn. It can't be too dominating where a person, this is not a Christian way of life. This may be applicable to other religions and things like that, but not for us. But this is also a point where we can see why, when people, again, coming back to that, this premature unity, I'm talking mainly about people that are unconscious, that Christians, they can't handle this diversity. They can't handle this being standing on these planks so they can fit. They don't want to do that. They discover a personality prematurely, and they haven't got enough skills to handle it. It's as simple as that. Okay, so we're coming slowly towards the end. So we can discern that the difference in character and personality doesn't mean that they are different in faith, as we said, in beliefs. And these are essential that should match like a foundation. But God sees further than we do. So at the same time, a believer may influence the one who isn't so strong in their belief. However, there should definitely exist some common ground. Some faith and beliefs are essential for the marriage to be successful. So in summary, in order that we are sure, if we are seeking some sort of a formula that we can check, that we're making a right choice when it comes to finding a right spouse in accordance with the will of God, we have to make sure that we live in constant touch with God to develop spiritual maturity. And that is developed, again, through prayer, obviously through the Holy Sacraments. That's a prerequisite, without which there's no spiritual life. If we don't attend the church services, if we don't partake in confessions, in communion especially, and confession, there's no spiritual life. And the prayer is the glue that connects it all, puts all together. And there's ways for these short prayers that can be used. We can talk about Jesus prayer, we can talk about many things. But people have to have this understanding if they want to discover the will of God, what it takes. And another thing that is also good, that can be taken, and the young people can take an advantage of, if they see this as a good thing, is also take advantage of, if they're in the church, of the priest, which means develop a relationship with the priest confessor. People confess to a priest, they allow the priest to see who they are. They're allowed to see the temperaments, they're allowed to see the personality of it. And so through this, priest sees variety of people. Sometimes it's not unknown when these priests, confessors, and holy elders will put two people together. I know a priest overseas who does it all the time, and no one has ever gotten divorced from whoever he put together. Mothers and fathers, especially mothers, have an intuition. People should always look, young people, introduce a person that they're dating to the parents, to the priest, to the church, to friends, and keep a healthy distance between, if possible, before entering into any intimate relationship. I'm talking about a sexual relationship. Before there's a decision, before the marriage, if possible. And if it's done, it's done. But there's also ways to change that. We know that people that have been worse sinners have become the greatest saints. Mary of Egypt, St. Paul, many people. Doesn't mean even the people that have been given the right person by God, that doesn't mean the marriage didn't break There's no bulletproof formula. People have to work and understand. And also the people that have come together prematurely doesn't mean that they will not be successful if they choose to do the right thing at some point in time. Well, I think we'll conclude here.
Before we finish for today, I'd like to say a few words, just a few thank you notes. As Draj told me many times, first and foremost we have to say thank you to God that brought us here today and gave us this beautiful day. I feel very much enriched, and I think this was a fantastic opportunity for all of us to grow in spirit and in our faith and as persons as well. Thank you, dear fathers who helped. Also, we need to thank Saint King Stefan of Dečani, whose memory we commemorate today. And Dečani and his Kosovo and Metohija are in great need of our prayers, even today. We need to thank our Bishop Silvan, who gave his blessings for today's gathering and who helped a lot in the process of organizing. Of course, Father Alex and Father George and Father Veselin, who gave these fantastic lectures today. We need to thank also a few people that made this day possible. One of the first ones is the moms from our playgroup, the Pelicans, Milica, Alexandra, thank you for helping with the kids back there. Well, there's a few of them, and they were the ones who were actually asking about it. And when I asked about the idea, they were the ones that showed greater support, and they were the ones that were pushing for it. So if it wasn't for them, this probably would not happen. A great thank you to Draj and Ljubica, and Mihailo, who did a fantastic job today of guiding the sessions. That was really good. All the sisters that prepared the beautiful food today, and we'll get to our afternoon tea in a minute. I bet we all need some coffee as well. There was a lot of work that was done here yesterday and this morning, and people who did most of the work were Tom Sinjelic, Tom Brkljac, Goran Mihić, Marko Dobrić, and a few other friends that helped and joined in. Bruno Mitrovic as well on the grill. So all of you not fasting today, say thank you to Bruno and Tom. They were the one responsible for the food today.
You'll be happy to record it, Roger, so we've got it with you.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, there was a lot of people who helped also with organizing this seminar in the administrative way. So Tom Sinjelic, our treasurer, who processed all the payments. It wasn't easy. Nikolina, that helped as well. Nada Lukic, where's Nada? Thank you, Nada. That was a great help. It wasn't easy organizing all this. We got a seminar on a very high academic level today. And the difference is, if you go to these seminars like this, like Orthodox seminars or Byzantine seminars, or that are happening at the colleges or the Macquarie University in Iran, they are, well, first of all, the food is nowhere even close to this. Lectures, well, we are there. We are at the same level probably. But it's much easier for them because they get like 10 to 14 people, and we get over 120 today. So that was a fantastic effort. Thank you all for coming and supporting this day. This is an amazing support, and this means a lot to us. So we were thinking about, maybe up to this morning, we were thinking about is this going to be an annual event or just one-off? Well, today I can tell you now with certainty this is an annual event. Next year this time. Thank you. A round of applause for you as well, because without you, what's the point of organizing it? Thank you. I don't want to forget Veselinka, the president of the sisters, and Mr. Dusan Čečez, the president of the parish, that helped a lot to organize this day, bring everything together. Also, a great support from Miss Television, Zoran Podinic, that helps every time we organize something, whatever we do, he is there to support us, to organize. Whenever we advertise something for our church, for our school, and so on, it's always free of charge. He's a great support of the church, and thank you so much. I have to also thank Father Alexander Ivanovic, a parish priest from our neighboring parish from Rudy Hill. They have a big event tonight in their church, and he still came today to show support and to show a brotherly love between two parishes. And he also asked me to advertise his event. They have a pokladno veče. It's sort of a party, good food, and we want to promote this as an after party of this seminar. So if you don't have anything else to do tonight, and if you still want to have some fun after all this, well, Rudy Hill is just across the hill. And they'll have food that's probably close to this. I'd like to apologize for any shortcomings, if there were any. This is our first time. We learned a lot as well in the ways of how to organize stuff. So thank you for your patience and your understanding. If you have any sort of criticism, constructive criticism, please share it with us. If your criticism is not constructive, please don't put it on Facebook, whatever you do, because we want to get more people back. And well, we learned a lot from all our lectures today, so I'm going to summarize all that in the next 2 hours. Now I'll say one sentence. Was it last week or one of these past Sundays we read a gospel of the Good Samaritan in church, and it ends with go and do likewise. So today we learned a lot of how to help ourselves, help our families, how to grow in faith, how to grow in spirit, how to grow in Christ. Well, let's all just go and do likewise. Thank you all. And now the afternoon tea is served. Please.